Hello guys, and welcome to a new Snow Division 2 video today by me, Vulcan. In this video I have for you guys the Battlegroup preview for the Fallschirm-Panzer, or Hermann Göring division. As usual, I'm going to be going through all of the units, saying why I take them and maybe why I don't. But first of all, let's start by looking at the division as a whole. So the Fallschirm-Panzer, I'm bringing it in with a balanced deployment type. I think this is really good for this division because it allows you a solid transition throughout all phases. You could potentially go for Maverick and play around the Sturm Tigers and maybe the Karlgrat in phase B, but in general, the balance allows you to play around everything this division has to offer, including the Jagdpanzers in phase A, Sturm Tigers in phase B, Tigers in phase C, and the Karlgrat, and also the Valkyr. Like, getting a lot of those in phase C is really useful, and having balanced deployment type allows you to afford those moving into the late game. But let's start by jumping into the Recon tab. So the 231 is going to be my first choice. It's got a 20mm autocannon, fantastic against infantry, and that's what you're going to be using it for. Infantry support. It can spot infantry in the open really well for you, as most Recon vehicles are used for. It's kind of for spotting things in open ground at a distance. Whereas something like the Spähstrupp here, they're used for spotting things at closer ranges, but I'll get to that later on. So yeah, the 231, really good, close range, fantastic for cleaning up half tracks as well. Things like the M2A1 half tracks that can be really irritating to deal with. If you can get it near a reinforcing road, you can pop half tracks that are used for transport, all that good stuff. So you want to keep them in places where they can use their maneuverability to their advantage, popping in and out of light cover, that kind of thing, and just support your infantry in general. Use the infantry ahead of them. The infantry will reveal like targets for you, and then you can move the 231 up if you spot something like just a group of infantry that doesn't have a PTRD or something. If they do have a PTRD, just make sure engaging them from over 500 meter range so you don't get penetrated. You can actually engage AT guns pretty well with these. Generally at close range, these will be accurate enough to just demolish an AT gun before it can fire, so you can do that as well. There is a chance that you might lose it, but most of the time I would say you're going to pin the AT gun before it fires. Anyway, moving on, we have the Aufklärer Panzer 3M. I've mentioned the Panzer 3s a lot of times due to their accuracy. The accuracy is fantastic. They have 60% base accuracy, which is unmatched really in any tank, and with high veterancy it goes up over 80% accuracy, which is nuts. And with 100mm penetration, that gives them pretty good capability at taking out T-34-76s. Anything higher than that they might struggle with, but they are also good infantry support, so you can keep them at closer ranges due to the two MG34s, and they can look after themselves. Really solid unit for 55 points. So now to the Spähstrupp and what I was talking about with the Recon. So as I mentioned, vehicle Recon is generally used for spotting things at range in the open, whereas infantry Recon is really good at spotting squads at short range. So an example would be if a Panzer Grenadier is running towards a building, and that building is occupied by some Avtos, the guys with 10-man squads with submachine guns. The Avtos won't reveal themselves until the Panzergrenadiers get within the 100-meter range, at which point the Panzergrenadiers are dead. Whereas if you have an infantry squad, an infantry Recon with that Panzergrenadier, then you will spot the Avtos before they can open up with their submachine guns, and the Panzergrenadiers will win that engagement, or at least force the Avtos out of the building they were in. So that's where infantry Recon comes in handy. It's quite a niche use, but I think it's always important to have some infantry Recon for that purpose. They're also good at spotting AT guns at around 400-meter range in heavy cover for you. So if there's a sort of engagement where you are attacking from one piece of light cover to the other, or one piece of heavy cover to another, having a Recon on the edge of that will allow you to spot any AT guns or infantry guns opposite. The only thing I would say, make sure the Spähstrupp do have return fire, otherwise the MG34 might give them away. Also, if you're that close, then maybe the G43s will as well. So yeah, just make sure that you use return fire appropriately with these squads. They're not there as frontline combat troops. They are there to provide you with the recon information. And I am going to be bringing them in with the 251 half-track, which provides us with an extra recon vehicle for the longer range once again. You can use these at close range just for machine gun support as well, if you need to. Other choices in the Recon tab include the BMW R75, unfortunately not worth the activation points in this particular battle group. Because they're unarmored, they're so easy to kill, and you don't really get much bang for your buck if you bring these in. The only good use for the motorcycles is their radio at the moment. They can provide you with radio for corrected shot very quickly on the front line, so that's a good use for them if you want to bring them. Two-man recon squads really aren't too favourable at the moment. I tend to prefer larger recon squads since they tend to maintain the very high optics. So smaller recon squads, again, not really good value for money. Spätrupp are good. You can bring them in, plenty of them in this particular battle group if you want more of them. Then there's a 250-10. I think the 250-10 is actually really good. It does have 144 HE shells, so it can just constantly hit an infantry squad from range. These can be really, really useful, and they're great value for money, but the trouble is they just don't have, again, enough bang for their buck to bring in. So you only get like 4 on a card, and with 1-star veterancy you get 6 with no veterancy. And honestly, like the amount they cost and the amount of availability you get, not worth it. The 231s are just way better at the role that these would be used for, which is just kind of attacking either infantry support guns or infantry themselves. And it can pop, obviously, lighter armor at close range due to the AP shells. Then there's a 258. Again, infantry support gun. 231 does it better. So get the 231s. And I'm bringing in the 231s at 1-star veterancy because you have to. Just another note there. Then there's a 233. Same deal. The heat shells can be useful, but the low accuracy just makes this very, very bad at the moment. Really, really bad. It's a shame because the optics used to be very high on this in Steel Division W44, which made people encourage people to use it. But in this one, only high, and it was nerfed in Normandy 44 as well at some point. So yeah, that's the recon units. In the infantry tab, it's relatively simple. There is new camos on all of these units. They share the same camos, I think, as the 16th Luftwaffe had in Steel Division Omni 44. But either way, Pioneers here, looking cool. These are the closer range engagement units with the 2 HE grenades. What you want to do with these, a good tip is, if you aren't good on your micro, don't try and dodge enemy grenades. Just stand still and take it, because if you try and move and you get hit by the grenade anyway, you're going to take extra damage and get pinned down more than if you were to just stand there. Because with infantry, there's like an entrenchment modifier, where if you're stood still with an infantry squad, you take less damage. And so in an infantry engagement in close range, make sure you just throw that grenade, you stand still if somebody's thrown it back, and just trade. Is probably the better way to do it, rather than trying to run away and taking damage, because likely your enemy will try and do that as well, and they'll take more damage. But if you don't, then you'll have the advantage. But sometimes if you get good on the micro and good on the timing, you can run away and take less damage, but it's all up to just practice, really. Regardless, good to know. If you're not too hot on the micro. The Hermann Göring Pioneer Führer is going to be our command in Phase A. You get 3 of these, and useful with the HE. Simple as that. The reason I'm bringing in the Pioneer Führer in Phase A is because we have the Panzergrenführer with the smoke grenades in Phase B. Usually I would have the smoke grenades in Phase A because it's just more utility. But we're going for the HE grenades here. So you can use these a little bit differently. Like if you're supporting, say, Panzergrens in a forest, the Pioneer Führer, you might want to move it forwards and throw these grenades and then run away. If you're engaged at close range against anything like, I don't know, Strelki or some sort of simple Russian squad. Nothing crazy like a Sapeli squad or maybe like an LPO squad, don't touch those. But if it's just a normal Strelky squad, feel free to run forwards and throw a HE grenade at them, because it will help out your other troops. Then we have a card of the Panzergrens with a Panzerfaust in Phase A. You get 6 of them in a card with no veterancy. Availability is a little bit tight here, so you could potentially swap them out for the normal Panzergrens without a Panzerfaust in order to get more. But just bear in mind, there is actually quite a limited amount of Opel Blitz in this particular division, so you would have to be bringing them in the half-tracks. Then there's the Hermann Göring Pioneers. These are actually fantastic. They are like Battlegroup Grenadiers. They have the MP44s as a secondary weapon, and also HE grenades. So exactly the same as Battlegroup Grenadiers, really, really strong. And you can get a lot of value out of these if you micro them correctly and keep them in sort of light cover. They can work well in heavy cover, but they will lose out to things like AVTOs. So what you want to do is kind of bring the enemy into like light forest and then sort of retreat to the point where you reach the heavy forest, they're still in the light forest, and that's when you can get some serious damage on your opponents. Moving into Phase B, we have the Panzergrenadier, as I already mentioned. We've got the Sturm Pioneer, just more close range capability for us, as well as the Battlegroup Grenadiers, which are some significant forces to be reckoned with. These have 8 MP44s, which is really, really strong, and G43s to boot. So fantastic mid-range engagement unit. If you want to be engaging at close range, use the Sturm Pioneers. One nice thing about these is you're forced to bring them in with 1-star veterancy. So that allows these to all be like 3-star with leader nearby plus commander. Then finally, you have the Valkyr. These are actually, I'm not too convinced about these actually. They have a limited amount of firepower for the amount they cost. But one great thing is that they have a lot of availability, and they're probably stronger in general than the Panzergrens because of the MP44s. So it's kind of like, do you want to engage at a more medium range, or do you want to engage at a more longer range? And the Panzergrens are good at the longer range with the MG42s. The Valkyr are good at the mid-range with the MP44s as well. But to get the most out of them, you want to be engaging at a 300-meter range. There isn't really any other choices except from the Hermann Göring Ersatztruppen, but I would probably stay away from these guys because I don't think... Oh, you do get Fel Gendarmerie, but either way, I just don't think it's worth it compared to the units that you can get here. And I guess you don't really need Fel Gendarmerie to bring them in, but yeah, they just don't seem to have value compared to something like the Pioneers with MP44s make up for the same amount as like 6 Ersatztruppen squads most of the time. So yeah, not really great value for money Ersatztruppen. Moving into the tank tab. Tank tab's actually pretty small in the Fallschirm-Panzer. You've got a few choices, but to start in Phase A, we've got all of the captured T-34s. So we've got T-34-41 Führers with the radios there. You get 3 of these in Phase A at 1-star veterancy. And then I've got 6 of the T-34-42s in Phase A. And these are actually quite nice because they have the 90mm of frontal armor. So really strong T-34s early on. Most of the time, the T-34-76s that the Russians have will only have 75mm of frontal armor because they are a different variant. So you can actually win engagements against the Soviets with their own tanks against quite a few of the divisions. Some divisions will have the same variant as this, so just be careful. Just keep an eye on the front armor engagements. But even so, if you end up engaging a similar tank, they don't actually penetrate each other too well because 100mm of penetration, 90mm of frontal armor, you're going to have to be relatively close in order to penetrate each other. So either way, the best tanks that you can get access to in Phase A is in fact the Soviet tanks in this case. In Phase B, I'm bringing in some Panzer IVHs. There is temptation here to bring them in at a higher veterancy because you only do lose out on 2 of them, but due to the tank tab being so light, I think the availability is important They're brought in Phase B so that we actually have something to support the Jagdpanzers in the anti-tank tab that we'll get to in a bit. There's only one card of Tigers in this division, and you're bringing them in Phase C in this particular battle group. If you bring them in Phase A, you only get one. If you bring it in Phase B, you only get two. So the way that I've built the division is to rely on these coming in Phase C and supplementing with other units in A and B. The only other choices I haven't mentioned are the Panzer IV-G and the Panzer IV-H Führer. Panzer IV-G is just a worse Panzer IV-H. The gun's pretty much the same. Everything's more or less the same, except from the Panzer IV has less armor. Also, the Panzer IV-H is slower than the Panzer IV-G, but there we go. That's pretty much it. Okay, over to the support tab. Now, support tab is actually quite interesting. There's a lot to go through here, but I don't actually have many choices. I've just got Oberblitz munitions in Phase A and C. I tend to always bring in Oberblitz or some kind of supply in Phase A at the moment because I think it's important to repair criticals and just have ammunition for mortars in the early game. So the Oberblitz munition helps me do that in Phase A, and then I've got more in Phase C. Generally, you're not going to get through 2 Oberblitz in the early to mid game, like the first 20 minutes. So you don't really need any more until Phase C, especially considering some artillery pieces do come with their own supply, so bear that in mind. I do have one commander, maybe a little light, but just be careful with the commander, don't let them get overrun. One thing I have been seeing quite a lot lately is when people push forwards, they bring their commander with them, which is fair enough, but just remember to bring it back again if you end up suffering a counterattack. A lot of people end up leaving their commander on the front line accidentally, and then realizing too late and losing it. And when you only have one commander, like I often build into my battle groups, that's not a good thing to happen. Right, this is the centerpiece of the Fallschirm-Panzer, the Sturm-Tiger. What a beast this is. 175mm of frontal armor, 18 damage with 14,612 blast. It's actually not the biggest amount of damage in this division, but it's still a big old gun. 380mm HE shells. Now this is a really interesting unit. I'm in this case choosing to bring them in Phase B with no veterancy. If you bring them in Phase A, you can only get one, but you can bring it in with one veterancy. Same deal in B. So you may as well bring it in Phase A if you want to up-vet it. And if you don't, then down-vet it, bring it in Phase B. So that's what we're going to be doing in this case. Now these work kind of weird. They work like artillery pieces, but you can't indirect fire. So they will fire at the last place you attacked or set the attack. So you can either fire position, and they'll fire position at a place they can see. So it has to be direct fire position. Or you can right click on a unit to attack the unit, but it will work like an artillery unit where it will fire at the place you right clicked rather than tracking the unit. So bear that in mind. Generally I would recommend using fire position commands and using the line of sight tool to see where you can fire, and then microing it appropriately. These are very micro heavy units, so babysit them if you're going to use them, but my Hermann Göring division is kind of built around the Sturm-Tigers in a lot of ways, so I often do spend a lot of time microing these. They are pretty weak on the side and rear armor, so bear that in mind. You are definitely going to be wanting to face these again, coming down to the micro. And they're not particularly fast off-road either, so you have to be careful. They don't really turn very fast. The traverse speed you see there is 9 degrees per second. Yeah, it's a slow beast, but it can kill things like T-34, 76s. It can even kill IS-2s, honestly. It would probably take 2 shots to kill an IS-2, or maybe 3, depending on how lucky you are. Based on luck, what I mean is like where the shell lands. If the shell lands behind the IS-2, it's going to do more damage than if it's in front, because HE does more damage based on the amount of armor. So there we go. That's pretty much all there is to say about the Sturm-Tiger. Just babysit it, and it will do a lot of work for you. It can delete infantry squads, like 12-man squads in one shot. It can delete any form of support weapon in one shot. And then lighter tanks will die in one shot. Anything with over, say, 75 armor might take 2 shots to kill, or 3 shots, depending on how much armor again. So yeah, there we go. Alright, other choices in the support tab include the Fel Gendarmerie. The Fel Gendarmerie aren't really worth taking. You don't get many of them on a card. And yeah, that's like 60 points worth of units. It's not really that good when you've got like 1,000 worth income to bring in, right? The Flammenwerfer, again, doesn't really find a place in this division. They are good, they are useful, but I just couldn't find the activation points to put them in. Fallschirm-Panzer, it's a nice unit, but it lacks ammunition, it lacks range on the flamethrowers, and so often it will just get caught out by infantry AT before it even does its job. So these are relatively micro heavy, and when you do micro them heavily and get a lot of value out of them, they'll just run out of flames and you have to resupply them, and it's really awkward. So not a massive fan of Fallschirm-Panzers at the moment. Then there's the M14s. You just don't really get enough of them to sort of give you a reason to bring them, and they're not particularly powerful either. The heat shell only has 65mm penetration and 30% accuracy. So yeah, they're just pretty awful all round. The machine guns aren't too bad, but yeah, you're not really going to be getting much done with these. MG42 squads, up to personal preference. I don't really like using MGs that often. I just find I don't bring them in if I use them in my divisions, because they're very, very situational. Like sometimes you can pin stuff at range and do a lot of damage with these, but most of the time you're just going to get hit by tanks at range or something that's going to pin them down very quickly, and then they won't do much damage and just die, and it's waste of points. So that's how I find them to be. And there is a Panzer IIIN. I do really like these, but again, couldn't find the activation points to bring them in. Grille, not a fan of the Grille, just because it's very brittle, and honestly, you've got the Sturmtiger, and the Sturmtiger does what the Grille you'd wish did, but never does, basically. And then you got your 2 command units here, the STKFZ 251-3 and the Befehlspanzer 4H. So yeah, if you need more command, I'd recommend bringing in probably the Panzer 4H. Then the anti-tank tab, let's go. We've got the Pak 40. I'm going to be bringing those in Phase A with 1-star veterancy. 3-star Pak 40s are deadly. So leader plus commander buff, these can be super strong. And I don't always bring them in Phase A. It definitely depends on what division I'm up against. Because generally in Phase A, what you do is bring in the Jagdpanzers. Yeah, the Pak 40s, they have 190mm of penetration on the APCR. APCR falls off more at range than the AP shells do, remember that. So APCR is really good at engaging things with high armor at closer ranges that you wouldn't normally be able to penetrate with an AP shell. The AP shells, I often end up turning off the APCR to engage with AP shells to kill things like T-34 76s and T-34 85s, depending on range. And then the HE shells, they can be useful for killing support weapons that can't fire back, especially the 45mm AT guns without HE. These can kill those without being fired back upon. They can also be useful for killing infantry guns, stuff like that. Although an infantry gun will often fire faster than the Pak 40 and then overwhelm it. So I would, most of the time, depending on the situation, pull back a Pak 40 from an infantry gun engagement. The other thing to note is that a lot of the times you'll want to turn off the HE on the Pak 40 so the Pak 40 doesn't reveal itself before it hits the target you brought it in to shoot at. Because sometimes the Pak 40s often start firing at infantry and then reveal themselves. They get hit by artillery, and then they're like out of the game before they've done what they're supposed to be there for. So back to the Jagdpanzers. The Jagdpanzers I've got in Phase A, B, and C. 2 in A, 4 in B, 8 in C. Unfortunately, upvetting these does remove a lot of availability, so I'm keeping them without their veterancy. But they're still incredibly strong, good value for money units. 130mm of frontal armor is a problem for a lot of Soviet armor. Then you've got a really decent gun as well, the 135mm of penetration, which is enough to, again, break through most Soviet armor. Now, T-34s at about 500 to 1000 meter range will match up to Jagdpanzers, but at the longer ranges, Jagdpanzers can be an absolute nuisance. So make sure you utilize the correct range based on what you're going up against. If it's T-34 76s, then you're fine to be as close as you like. If it's 85s or anything above, then you probably want to be engaging from range, except from obviously against IS-2s, which will just crack these like nuts. So yeah, Jagdpanzer, really solid tank, can provide decent fire support for infantry as well, whilst being relatively impenetrable to enemy AT guns. Now, other choices, we do have some Panzerschrecks. It may be your preference to have some Panzerschrecks in the battle group, but I found Panzerschrecks less and less effective the more I've played Steel Division 2. So they are something that I often drop in favor of other things now. But Panzerschrecks are really nice to have if you can afford the activation points. They are strong. They are really strong in the right situations. But it's one of those units that's a lot more sort of situational than, say, a Jagdpanzer. So that's why we're bringing in the Jagdpanzers and not the Panzerschrecks. Then there's some other ones. They do have really fast aim time, and they are good value for money. If you manage to trade like one tank, like one T-34, you've got your money back. But they can be strafed, they can be mortared. They die to a lot of things. They're very, very weak to any form of HE fire, and therefore not as desirable as Jagdpanzers that will often pay themselves off much better than a Marder 1 will. Like a Marder 1 will often trade, whereas a Jagdpanzer will get like 3 kills and then die, for example. The Pak 38s are nice. You get them at 1-star veterancy. Could be a good replacement for the Pak 40 if you want more AT gun availability in the early game, if that's something you like to do. But in my case, I just prefer to have the Pak 40s. I just think they're more reliable with their extra AP. Then you have more Pak 40s available. You actually have a lot of Pak 40s in this anti-tank tab. That's something worth mentioning. So if you don't like using Jagdpanzers, you could shift to a more defensive style with Pak 40s. But Jagdpanzers do give you that more offensive capability and more mobility. Let's move into the anti-air tab. My anti-air is pretty focused around Flak 88s. We've got Flak 88s in Phase A, Phase B, and Phase C. Flak 88s, I've started to use them a lot more. They have 12 strength, which actually makes them hard, not necessarily hard to kill by artillery, but if they start taking damage from artillery, you have more than enough time to react to it. You can start wheeling them away from wherever the artillery fire is coming in, get them into cover, move them through cover, just get them away and into a different position. The other thing about 88s, and one thing that's really nice about them, it's something I always used to talk about in Steel Division Normally 44, they help you pin down bombers before they drop their payload. You know, things like Flak 38 20mm and Flakvillings, quite often the bombers will drop their bombs and then take a lot of damage because of the range difference. But Flak 41s, the 88mm, they have such long range against aircraft. So they often will hit an aircraft before it drops its payload, and that is so important. Also, if you have enough of them or high veterancy on them, they can one-shot stuff out the sky with a good critical, especially fighter planes. And that's really satisfying to watch as well. Further to that, high veterancy Flak 88s are great at destroying ground targets. So in support of things like your Sturmtigers or your Tigers in Phase C, 88s can be really, really strong. If they aren't the focus of fire, but they are supporting something that is, then they do fantastically well. As soon as they come under fire, they do take a lot of suppression very quickly, so don't have them out in the open unless you have something covering them, or something that's more threatening than an 88 on that field, like a Sturmtiger, like a Tiger E. For example. So there you go. That's the 88s. And plenty of availability. Not much point in upvetting them because you lose too much availability by doing so. Then there's the SDKF Z71s. Having some ability to kill faster in the late game is very important, especially when there's going to be an abundance of aircraft. So this allows you to kind of just finish off units that are already hit by the 88s. They clean them up very nicely. You are going to have to micro these as they don't have any armor. So if they fire a lot at a certain amount of aircraft, your opponent's going to try and break down your AA. So make sure that you move them after firing as much as you can to avoid like any form of artillery fire, because mortars will kill these. Then there's Flak 38 20mm. You can't, oh actually no you can, sorry, bring them in with the SDKF Z10-4. This is actually a relatively nice combination that I would do in Phase A with probably 1-star veterancy, so you can put them to 3-star veterancy because the 20mm are only generally effective when they have the 3-star veterancy. So that's something to consider if you want more availability of AA in the early game. The Gepards can be relatively nice. You bring them in with 1-star veterancy, you can get a lot of them later on. And a good thing about the Gepard that I think a lot of people overlook in the anti-air tab is that they can smash infantry to pieces. They have enough armor that they can't get hit by light arms fire, unlike the SDKF Z71s. But they can be penetrated by PTRDs. But whenever there's an infantry squad with a low range AT weapon, the Gepards are fantastic for ripping them to pieces whilst not being able to be broken down themselves. So that's pretty much it for the anti-air tab. I've spoken about the other choices here. You can get a lot of AA in this division, and you can either focus on SDKF Z71s or 88s. If you prefer flak for links, just go for the SDKF Z71s. You get plenty of them. Right, moving into the artillery tab, there is a lot to look at here, that's for sure. First of all, though, we're going to go for 3 of the SDKF Z251-2 mortar half-tracks. I think mortar half-tracks are incredibly important. If you have the option to bring a mortar half-track over a normal mortar, always do it. It's worth the points, no end. Because in the early game, often you'll find that people try and counter-battery your mortars with their mortars. And if yours are armoured, then you're always going to win that counter-battery engagement. Furthermore, they can move, so generally you're not going to get hit by counter battery as much, which is nice. You can give like a fire position order and then a shift move order, so that after the fire position order is up, they'll fire 5 shells and then they'll move to wherever you click the move order. Really worth doing. Another great thing about these is they have way more ammunition. They have 40 HE shells. A normal 80mm mortar on its own only has 25 HE shells. So big difference, don't have to be supplied as quickly in the early game, even though you do have the supply to do so if you need to. Like if you've been using them a lot, then obviously you got the supply there to sort them out. But yeah, really worth having for sure. Then in Phase B, I've got the SK18 100mm. These come in with the supply trucks, the multi-ammunition supply trucks there. These are fantastic counter battery, and that's almost always what I bring them in to do. Just bring them in, give them an unloaded position order, make sure you give a move order to the multi-ammunition to move away from your artillery piece, but in range to resupply, because otherwise what's going to happen is that's going to blow up next to your artillery. If it gets hit by counter battery and boom, you lose both. But either way, the SK100s, bring them in, put them on counter battery orders, and they will do a lot of work throughout the game. That's these new smart orders, that is. Really, really good with those. Right, this is the Cargarat. Obviously this is a Storch plane, but on the right hand side here at the bottom you can see the Cargarat. It's a 600mm self-propelled gun that does tons of damage if it lands on the target. It's got 30 damage. You saw the Sturmtiger had 18 damage with 14,000 blasts. Well, this has 30 damage with 22,000 blasts. And the Sturmtiger, as I mentioned before, can one-shot an infantry squad, it can one-shot support weapons, it can one-shot light tanks and potentially medium tanks. So this has more potential to one-shot those kinds of stuff and even heavier tanks if it lands on target. Now that's the biggest problem with the Cargarat. And honestly why it's more of a meme sort of unit than something that's serious, because the biggest problem with this is it's a really slow airplane that calls it in, so it often gets shot down very fast if someone sees it. Like if you're playing a 1v1 against the Fallschirm-Panzer and you see this plane come in, you're going to do everything you can to shoot it down so that those cargo rat shots like do not come in ever. And it's going to be hard to stop it from dying unless you have a lot of AA set up. So that's probably the only way you're ever going to be bringing these in, is you have lots of AA set up, and that's why I'm bringing them in phase C, to get not only two of the planes, which gives you 3 shots of each, but also because you're going to have AA at that point in the game. So either way, the thing that makes them questionable is because the radius of which they land the shot is often quite large, and it's one shot. So you have like this radius that's like random as to where it's going to land in, and if you want to make that more accurate, you've got to basically sacrifice it like a time. So if you want it more accurate, it's going to take longer to come in. If it's less accurate, then you have less time to wait, basically. But because it's like a radius in which it can land, sometimes it can land at the very edge, like well away from the target that you wanted to hit, and therefore it will probably pin down the unit that you tried to hit, but it won't kill it or do much damage. So that's probably the biggest thing to think about with the cargo rat. It can be fantastic, it's very hit or miss. Then we have finally the SFH 150mm. These are more for just saturating heavy tanks or enemy infantry, just general frontline support artillery, not terribly accurate compared to the 100mm, but do have decent blast and damage that allows you to pin down units that get hit by it, and they're going to be coming in with the multi-munition trucks as well, so that I can use my supply for whatever else I need. You might need the supply for the Sturm Tigers quite often if you manage to keep them alive for a long time during the game. Alright, other choices in the artillery tab: Beobachter, 2-man squads, Recon, and radios. Their Recon's not as good as anything in the Recon tab, so not worth it for that. And the radios you can get from any command infantry in the infantry tab for the Fallschirm-Panzer. So yeah, not worth bringing at all. And you are limited for artillery tabs here quite severely. Then there's the Battleführer. In a lot of divisions, I often use the Battleführer as a supplement infantry leader in phase A or B, but in this case, because you have very limited artillery slots, it's better for me to bring in the 2 leaders in the infantry tab. Then there's 80mm mortars, simple stuff, just better to have the 251-2s in my opinion. The 105mm, just not really very good damage, low accuracy. 120mm, low accuracy, decent damage, but require a lot of veterancy to be decent, and just not a fan. Then there's the Vespers, which is basically this 105 on a hull, so again, low accuracy, not very good. And then there's the Hummels, which have a similar damage to the 150mm, except from they have a hull, but they suffer from rate of fire. So if you bring them in as just a normal artillery gun, you get a better rate of fire than if you bring it in with an armoured hull. And that's pretty much it. That's why I'm bringing in the 150mm like that. Also, if you bring in the Hummels, obviously you're not going to be able to use the transports, so this way you get the supply with the artillery gun. Okay, into the air tab, and well, my only choice is the ME109 G2 BR21. Pretty simple stuff. These I might end up changing out at some point, but they have 210mm HE rockets. They are useful for killing support weapons, so AT guns, infantry guns. They don't do much damage to anything else. Simple as that. They won't really pin infantry that well, but they do leave napalm on the ground, so they could dislodge units in small areas of cover. If there's like one building in the middle of like an area and you know there's an infantry squad in it, hit it with these rockets and the infantry unit won't be able to stay in that building. It will have to run away or die. So it's a good way to dislodge units, potentially. But the reason I'm having these, I'm bringing them in because as soon as they fire the rockets, they speed up and they can become relatively decent fighters. So yeah, with the new changes in the DLC, fighter bombers are a lot better now. Once they drop their payload, they speed up to the same speed as their normal variant. So in this case, a G6, an ME-109 G6, which is that stat. So it'll go from 440 km/h speed to around 590. So that's basically why I'm bringing those. So fighter, bomber kind of role. Then there's the ME-410 Recon aircraft. I don't think these are very good value for money. If they had guns on the front, then they'd be great, but they don't. They just have their turrets active. They do have the gun holes, but there's no machine guns there. Just the turrets in the rear, so yeah, not very good value for money. Ju-87D5, this has the payload of 4 50-kilogram bombs and the one 250-kilogram bomb. These can actually do a lot of damage to tanks. If you use like 2 of these on a T-34-85, you're likely to kill it. But the trouble is they're really slow, and there's not often a player is going to let you just freely bomb with Ju-87s. And AA will force them back often before they drop their payload if your opponent has invested in 1 or 2 pieces. So yeah, not great value in my opinion. The nice thing about the ME-109 G6 BR-21s is they're fast, and they will fire their rockets from a distance and pull away from AA before it hits them most of the time. Then there's the ME-410 aircraft. These fighters, the heavy fighters, they can be good if you upvet them. You can see you can push their agility to medium if you upvet them, but then you don't have much availability, so not worth it in my opinion. The Ju-87 G2, good with the gun pods for killing large amounts of tanks, but you're only going to kill like 1 or 2 tanks in one pass. The slow speed actually benefits the AT in a lot of cases, but does leave them vulnerable to AA and aircraft. So you're going to have your own AA network set up in order to make good use of these if you want to use them. But they just don't have activation points for my division. Like, you'd have a limited amount of slots in the air tab in the Fallschirm-Panzer, and they also cost quite a lot. If this second slot was 1 cost, then I'd consider bringing 2 aircraft slots, but in this case, not worth it. Then there's the standard ME-109 G6s, basically the same as the ME-109 G6 BR-21, just without the rockets. Then you have the Ju-87 D5, which has the cluster AP, which is really, really good because it's reliable at killing heavy armor, like super heavy armor, like IS-2s. You drop 1 payload of this on an IS-2 and you're going to kill it, which is a good value from Ju-87 D5. So there's potential that these could be used. They would be more reliable than the gun pod variant. Then there's the G2R2 with the 4 50-kilogram bombs. Again, they'd speed up to the same speed as a G6 once they drop their payload. So there's potential to swap these out for the G2 BR-21, sorry, if you prefer bombs over rockets. Bombs are decent for indirect fire and just pinning down like AT guns and stuff where you know they are. And that's it. So that's all of the air tab, and then for defenses, just simple stuff. Alright, so there you go. That's the Fallschirm-Panzer. It's a really interesting division, but the way that I play it out is just have the strong support in Phase A between the T-34s and the Recon vehicles with really decent infantry. You have the Pak-40s for any heavier armor, plus an 88 if you need it. Bring in the mortar support. Mortar support's very important. Jagdpanzers are your main armor for Phase A, for pushing, if you want to make some ground. The T-34s can also obviously accompany those very well. Into Phase B, you're going to have your Sturmtigers coming out, and you're going to accompany them with more Jagdpanzers, or potentially Panzer IVs if you need them, and more decent infantry. Sturm Pioneers, Begleitgrenadiers. Grenadiers. You've got plenty more leaders if you need them. There is an argument to be made that you could push these Panzergrenführer units to Phase C, because I'm not sure you get through 3 Pioneerführer in Phase A, as well as the T-34 command tanks. So yeah, there's potential for those to be pushed to Phase C, so you have more availability of the Panzergrenführer. But either way, Yeah, Sturm Tigers, decent infantry, you got good armored support, plus more AA if you need it. If you're getting hit hard by artillery, counter battery with the 100 mils. Then into phase Z, you probably want to hit up the AA first, and then bring in the Kargorat if you want to play with that. Get the AA in first, then start investing in your Tigers, and push through with, again, your decent infantry. And that's going to be your force into the late game. Moving into like the extreme late game, you might find this falls off a little bit, but you have an abundance of Jagdpanzers, so it should be okay for the most part. IS-2s will break this down quite easily, but anything else you should stand a good chance against. And that's it. That's the Fallschirm-Panzer. So quite a long one, this. I think it's just because there's a lot of units to talk about, a lot of new unique units and stuff. I really do like the Fallschirm-Panzer. It has an interesting playstyle. Generally works well balanced. I'm tempted to try it Maverick, as I mentioned before, but that's up to you guys. I think I'll leave that to you if you want to try that out. So there we go. If you have any questions or anything, leave them in the comments. Any suggestions as well, make sure to leave them there. Deck code's in the description as always. But that's it. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.